Hope everyone had beautiful, meaningful Seders last night. I want to take a little time to look at an interesting verse in the Etz Chaim Chumash. If you want to turn to page 339, Exodus chapter 5, verse 4. This is as Moses and Aaron approach Pharaoh to say, "Let my people go." Our children were busy singing that last night at our Seder. You might note here in verse 4, it says, "But the king of Egypt said to them, 'Moses and Aaron, why do you distract the people from their tasks? Get to your labors.'" And this leads to Midrashim and some interpretation questioning. Pharaoh says, let the people, the Israelites, get to their tasks. Are Moses and Aaron not part of the people? Are they not slaves? This verse leaves that somewhat ambiguous. It implies here that they're not enslaved like the rest of the people, and yet at the end of the verse it says, "Get to your labors." So what is it? Are Moses and Aaron slaves, or are they not? The Midrash, actually, Shemot Rabbah, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is quoted as saying that the tribe of Levi, the tribe that Aaron and Moshe are from, was actually free from harsh labor in Egypt. This is why Moses and Aaron were free to come and engage in this conversation and come to talk to Pharaoh in this way. And yet, Pharaoh says, get to your labors, get to your tasks at the end. The ambiguity we find in this verse mirrors, in some way, the ambiguity of our Seder. As I spoke about on Shabbat Hagadol this past Shabbat, on the one hand, we recount at the Seder having been slaves in Egypt, avadim hayinu, eating matzah, the bread of affliction, and maror, the bitter herbs, and yet at the very same time, we are to recline and feast like kings and queens, celebrating the sweetness of freedom. I also touched on charoset, which itself is a paradox. At the same time, both sweet, as a zecher, as a reminder of Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, and bitter, like the mortar, reminding us of the bitterness of slavery. In some way, perhaps this ambiguity is because we are both part of the story of the Exodus, and we are removed from it. We can imagine enslavement. We may have suffered serious oppression, but none of us are truly living or have lived as slaves in Egypt ourselves. While on a collective level, we, the Jewish people, see ourselves as descendants from those ancient Israelites. Can any of us say with absolute certainty that we are personally descended from them? The Chida, a prominent Sephardic rabbi in the 18th century, touches on this idea in his commentary on the Haggadah, wondering why the beginning of the Passover retelling, Avadim Hayinu, we were once slaves, is followed immediately by the story of 5 rabbis in Bnei Brak. You might have noticed if you were reading this section in the Haggadah, we begin the story of the Exodus from Egypt, Avadim Hayinu, and one paragraph later, suddenly we're sidetracked to these 5 rabbis in Bnei Brak. And sure, that first paragraph does say, even if we were all wise, even if we were all sages, we should still tell the story. It could be for that reason that we move on to the story of the 5 rabbis. But the Chida has a different reason. He states that these rabbis all come from the tribe of Levi. When it says Vechol, these rabbis, all of these rabbis, it's actually an acronym. Kohanim, Leviim, Vechol. And yet even though these rabbis their ancestors were not slaves in Egypt, they were Leviim, free from harsh labor, they still spent the entire night exploring it in depth. Ultimately, the Exodus is such a powerful story that even those who are not descended, even those who are not Jewish, the entire world, everyone can identify with it. And indeed, people and cultures across the world have used this story to understand their own narratives. On the one hand, we are to imagine the hardships of our ancestors. Bechol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. In every generation, each person is to see themselves as if ke'ilu, as if they came out of Egypt, imagining as though they were there. And yet just a couple lines later, we say, Otanu Hotzi, that literally God took us out of Egypt. We are at once both outside observers and literally a part of the story. The Hasidic master, Rabbi Aryeh Leib of Ger, in his Sfat Emet commentary, writes that this transformation, going from being outside observers to being literally part of the Exodus from Egypt, allows each generation to experience the Exodus in their own lives. The word Mitzrayim, you may, for those who speak Hebrew, the ayim ending is duplicating the word. You might know Einaim, 2 eyes, Oznaim, 2 ears. Mitzrayim is 2. In ancient times, there were 2 Egypts, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, which is where Mitzrayim comes from. A Meitzar is a narrow place, a narrow strait. All of us have these narrow straits. As Rabbi Nachman of Bretzlav says, Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tsar me'od, the entire world is a very narrow bridge, a very narrow strait. As Rabbi Aryeh Leib of Ger says, Ve'yachol latzet kol echad mimeitzar shalo, that everyone, we may not have been physically in Egypt ourselves, none of us were there thousands of years ago as slaves, but all of us have a meitzar, have a narrow strait, have challenges in our lives that we come through, and that we are blessed and privileged to be able to come through. And that is what Rabbi Leib of Ger is saying, that each person can come out of their own meitzar, their own narrow place. And so, in the words of my teacher, Rabbi Danny Nevins, from the biblical text right here in Exodus chapter 5, verse 4, through our Seders last night and today, we have always felt both inside the story and outside of the narrative at the same time. We are both vulnerable and powerful, both oppressed and uplifted, both connected and alienated from a story that has been told for more than 3 millennia and is still growing in meaning. And it is perhaps this being inside and outside of the story that continues to resonate, continuing to find meaning where this story connects with us and where we connect with our history. As data has shown, as surveys have shown, Jews host or attend a Passover Seder at a far higher rate than just about any other Jewish ritual. We continue to add to the story of liberation today, to understand it in new dimensions, to take courage from its drama, and to continue to live out from its message. Wish everyone a beautiful Seder again this evening, and Chag Sameach.